Guests and callers, and not necessarily those of this station, its staff, management, or sponsors. Are you a family caregiver? Are you caregiving for someone who can no longer take care of themselves? Are you overwhelmed? This is Caregiver Solutions Info with Marcia Teele. Marcia will be hosting an hour of true stories and information, tips and updates of the latest research and necessary information in the caregiving field, focusing on you, the family caregiver. An Alzheimer's disease and dementia care expert, Marcia has 15 years of hands-on experience at Arden Courts, a leader in assisted living dementia communities here in the U.S. Marcia covers everything you need to know as a family caregiver, especially if you care for a loved one with Alzheimer's disease or other related dementia or chronic illness. If you have a friend or relative that is also a family caregiver, call them now. They won't want to miss a minute. And let them know they can watch on caregiversolutions.info. And they can listen on WNN 1470 AM in South Florida or nationally on the iHeartRadio app. Now, sit back, relax, and learn from our host, Marcia Teele, as she brings information to you that may just be the caregiving solution you need.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Caregiver Solutions Info Show. I'm glad you could join us today, and I hope you're all staying safe and healthy during this COVID-19 pandemic. So today we're going to be talking about our aging parents. So if you're a caregiver, a family caregiver, and you're taking care of an elderly parent or both elderly parents, or maybe you have parents that are getting to that stage and you're wondering, will I have to take care of them? And if so, what's it going to be like? What do I have to do? I don't know. So my special guest today has been down that road. She wrote a book about her experiences taking care of her elderly mother after her father had passed away, along with her sister. And she wrote this book in such a way that you just feel like you were there. And it is a wonderful book. The author is a first-time author, and in her life before writing this book, most of her experience was doing some research, some scientific research. She's a hospice consultant, and she also does some grant review work. And when she decided to write this book, it became a really great book for caregivers, voted #1 on caring.com for 2017. So I'd like to bring Melanie Merriman onto our program. She is joining us from her home in Cape Cod. There she is. Hi, Melanie. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Marcia. Great to be here.
I'm so glad that you could join us. I have to tell everybody, you were so kind and gracious to mail me a copy of your book. And I spent the last week every day reading it. And every chance I had, I'd read another chapter until I finally finished it this morning. And I have to tell you, I feel like I know you. I've never met you. It's the first time seeing you here. But I feel like I know you. I feel like you have written so much detail into your book that anybody reading it can actually follow along your journey because they feel like they're there with all the details that you provided. So I have to say it was a very enjoyable read, and thank you for writing this book. And that being said, the book is about your experiences. You and your sister Barbara took care of your mom as she was aging. I guess the first question is, why did you write a book about it?
Well, the short answer is that it was such a profound experience that after my mother died, I found that I just needed a way to process everything that had happened. And I had been doing some creative writing, and I was involved with a writing class. And I basically said to the teacher, I'm thinking about doing this, but I've never written a memoir. I've never written anything like this. And she said, if you have a story to tell, tell it. And so I really just sat down to write it. And what I realized is that I thought I was prepared for my mother's last years, or her final years. And, I had been a hospice consultant, so I had that experience. I knew a lot more about aging and illness and the healthcare system than most people do. So I thought I was prepared in that way. And I had my sister also, and we were a really good team. And even with all of those things kind of in my corner, I was still really humbled by how difficult the whole experience was. So partly I wrote the book to examine how close my sister and I came to what our goal was, which was to make our mother's last years the best that they could possibly be. And it was also to really validate and normalize the kinds of experiences that other caregivers are going through. And that's part of why, you mentioned that I told a lot about myself, and I used a lot of specificity about our experience, because I think sometimes in that specificity is where you actually find the universal themes. People may not have experienced it the same way that I did, but they probably experienced something like that, more or less the same thing. And the last reason I wrote the book is because I realized, as I was talking to my friends about this, that everybody I knew was going through some version of this, and they all felt like they were the only ones doing it. And I realized we need a lot more discussion in this country about aging and about the kind of family caregiving that goes on around aging. So that's the short answer and the long answer.
Well, I'm glad that you wrote it. It is an awesome book, very relatable. I have the book right here, so everybody can see it. I
Great.
put it up on the screen. It's called Holding the Net, Caring for My Mother on the Tightrope of Aging. Holding the Net, Caring for My Mother on the Tightrope of Aging. How did you come up with this title of this book, with Holding the Net and a picture of a person walking on a tightrope?
Well, the title really came about as I was writing the book, and I started to conceive of this idea, or this concept of the tightrope of aging. So what I mean by that is there's this period of time between when older people can live independently and live well, and when they're actually at the end of their life. And there's this period where there's physical and there's mental decline, to the point where they can no longer live well on their own and completely independently. And what I realized in my own life is that we were completely prepared for my mother's death. My mother had done a living will. She had put everything in a trust. In fact, she and my father had living wills since they were in their 50s. So they were thinking ahead to their death, and my sister and I were really felt like we were prepared for that. But what we weren't prepared for was this period of time when there would be physical decline and mental decline and trouble walking and falls and a need for help and a desire not to have any help on her part, and all the things that would happen before she ever really got to the point where she was dying. So I came to sort of think about that as a time when every move feels precarious, just as if you were walking a tightrope. And then the holding the net came because I realized that that's what the caregivers do. When the aging person is on the tightrope, you're there trying to hold the net, kind of running around underneath and trying to get it in the right spot.
Well, there certainly was a lot of changes that your family went through as your mom aged. You started caring for her when she could no longer be on her own. And I mean, even in her own apartment, a condo in Florida, in South Florida, and you lived in Miami, and your sister lived out of state, but you managed it. You managed it until you couldn't manage that scenario anymore. And then the book is all about the changes that you have to make along the way. And I think that's
Mm-hmm.
one of the hardest things for not only the person that's getting older to make changes, because they don't like change. Elderly people are set in their ways most of the time, and then it makes that even much harder for their caregivers to initiate change. And so it becomes, a little bit of a struggle, and trying to do the right thing for them, but also being the one having to make the decisions. And you're becoming the decision maker, you and your sister making those decisions because mom wasn't able to do them on her own for her best. I mean, she could make decisions, and I enjoyed the book where you discuss the tug of war, I guess would be a good way to say it, between what she wanted and what you wanted and how you had to compromise. And there was a lot of compromise, wasn't there?
There was. There absolutely was. A lot of that, the issues sort of around change, a lot of what made that so difficult was that there was a lot of resistance on both sides. Resistance from my mother, but also resistance mostly from me. I think my sister was a little bit more less emotional about the whole thing than I was. But my mother, as you point out, my mother had a lot of resistance to moving to any kind of change. And I think that makes sense. I mean, frankly, nobody likes change, right? But as you get older and you're feeling a little bit less sure about your physical capabilities, maybe also your mental capabilities, you're not remembering things as well, you don't feel as quick, your reflexes are kind of slowing down. It's all those very normal, natural things. But that makes you want to cling even more to the cocoon that your own home and where it feels safe and that sort of thing. And so I think that's really what's going on with respect to the resistance. And there's everybody talks to me about how much resistance there is from their aging parents to modify their home, to move out of the home, to have caregivers come into the home, and frankly, just to admit, that they need any help. My mother kept insisting she didn't need any help. She didn't want any help. She wanted to stay in her condo no matter what. But there was resistance on my side too, because as you said, eventually we had to make decisions for her. And I resisted that tremendously because I grew up with a mother who was very smart. She had a college degree. She graduated from Swarthmore in 1937. She was a smart woman. She was a logical woman. She was my teacher in so many ways. And I kept thinking that this issue of her making good decisions would turn around, that she would eventually see that things really had to change. And I didn't want to usurp her autonomy. I didn't want to take away from her the decisions that I thought she could make on her own. She was always so practical. I thought she's going to be practical. She's going to come around and see that it has to be this way. But I think in doing that, I was kind of honoring a person who wasn't the same person anymore. I was honoring my mom in the way that I remembered her instead of the way that she really needed us at this time. So eventually we did have to make some decisions for her, including the decision to move nearer to my sister, out of her condo in Florida and to nearer my sister in North Carolina.
Yeah. That was very well put about honoring who she was, not who she had become as she got older. So with that, we're going to take a quick break. So we'll be right back with more. Stay with us.
Arden Courts is not just a place to live, it's a place to call home. Residential living combined with quality caregiving. This is the philosophy behind Arden Courts. Communities created exclusively for individuals with Alzheimer's disease and related dementia who would benefit from a safe and structured environment. For additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides, call 478-2410 to locate a community nearest you. Inquire about our educational seminars, resource library, or support groups, or simply feel free to ask questions you may have about Alzheimer's and related dementias. At Arden Courts, we know, we understand, and we can help because memory care is all we do. Remember, call 888-478-2410 for additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides. You are listening to your host, Marcia Teele, an Alzheimer's disease and dementia care expert on caregiversolutions.info. If you have a question or wish to share a story, call into the show at 888-565-1470 and talk with Marcia. Now, back to Caregiver Solutions.
We're back, and my guest today is Melanie Merriman. She wrote this book. It's called Holding the Net, Caring for My Mother on the Tightrope of Aging. It's a memoir about caring for her mom along with her sister as mom aged. So I had mentioned earlier that I had the opportunity to read your whole book to the end and enjoyed it very much, and even got a little teary-eyed at the end. But there were a couple.
Thank you.
That's good. You want emotion, right? That's good.
Yeah.
There were a couple sentences that stuck out that kind of came off the page for me as I was reading the book. So I'd like to pull a couple of those quotes from your book and let you comment on them, if that's okay with you. Okay, so the first one is, quote, 5 days into full-time caregiving, and I was a basket case, unquote. And this happened when your mom was in the hospital and rehab when she had the pacemaker put in. Tell me about feeling like a basket case.
Oh my gosh. Well, I had not anticipated how much energy and emotion would be involved in that full-time sort of caregiving. I was still living in Florida. My mother was living near my sister in North Carolina, 5 minutes away, something like that. And I would come up once every 3 months or so and spend a few days. My sister was still there, but she was off, basically. I would say, okay, you're off, I'm on. And the time that you're talking about, so I was on, but my sister was still there. My mom was in her apartment. I would spend a lot of time with mom, mostly watching movies or maybe going downstairs for coffee and donuts, at the place where she lived, something like that. But the time you're talking about, my sister had a vacation planned, and 2 days before that, my mother had what we called the big fall. This is every child's nightmare. She fell at night. She had one of those panic buttons. For whatever reason, she didn't use it. She fell getting ready for bed, and she wasn't found until the next morning. And this was a couple days before my sister was due. And just understand, she was still living in an independent apartment at the time. My sister was about to go on vacation, and she said, oh, I'm going to have to cancel my vacation, et cetera. And I said, no, I'm going to come up just as we'd planned and stay for the 2 weeks that you're gone. But it turned out to be sort of the roughest 2 weeks in the whole caregiving experience, because my mother was in the hospital when I arrived. She stayed there for 8 days, which is a really long time for somebody who's 93 years old. And then she went into rehab. And so I had to be with her in the hospital, negotiate with the doctors, get her moved to the rehab center, stay with her in the rehab center until, she was basically acclimated to the extent possible. And then I just went back every single day to make sure that everything was going okay. I'd never been around a rehab center with my mother before. So it was new to both of us. And it was just completely exhausting. And part of that was because I wanted to be in complete control of everything. I was just trying to smooth everything over for her. I was trying to learn the names of all of the nurses and all of the CNAs so that I could interact with them on a one-to-one first name basis. I made it perhaps even more difficult than it needed to be, but I would come home at 7 or 8 o'clock, maybe eat, whatever was a little bit of something in the refrigerator, and just stretch out on the couch with an Afghan. And that was about all I could do.
Yeah, you found real fast how tough full-time caregiving is, as a lot of caregivers do find when they're sort of thrown into it without really preparation of being a caregiver. So that being said, I have another quote from your book.
Okay.
Quote, "It would be some time yet before I understood that once decline has become irreversible, faster is better." Unquote. Why did you feel that way?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Um, by this point, my mother had really begun to decline, both physically and mentally. So what I sort of learned by watching her and then by reliving it through the book and writing the book is the sort of insidious nature of the tightrope of aging and that period of decline. It starts so slowly that it's really imperceptible. My mother's friend would tell me that my mother was declining, and then I would go to visit my mom, and she would seem the same to me. Eventually, her friend said, "Yeah, well, she rallies when you're here, and then when you leave, it takes her a week to recover." So she was declining more than we noticed, but after a certain period of time, the decline became much more rapid, much steeper. And I think what happened for me during that period is I wanted to think it was a dip and she was going to get better and come back up. Um, and so that's what I kept working towards. I kept saying to my sister, "Can't we get her more physical therapy? Can't we do this? Can't we do that?" And after that fall, when she was in the hospital, they found that she was having a lot of arrhythmia, heart arrhythmia. And the doctor said, "Well, maybe that's why she's falling so much. Maybe she's not getting enough oxygen. And if we give her a pacemaker, it'll be better." And I wanted to believe that. And I wanted to think that maybe this was reversible. But what I realized was it wasn't. And that kind of a procedure just really took the stuffing out of her completely. And if I had understood that the decline was already so rapid, I would have known that I should let it go, because you can't fight it at that point. And it would have been easier for her not to put her through the insertion of the pacemaker, the extensive rehab afterwards, etc. So
Yeah,
that's
I
what I meant by
understand.
that. There
Yeah,
comes a
thank
point
you.
when you just need to step back and let nature take its course.
Yeah, thank you. That's a tough one right there to figure that out. Another quote from your book, quote, "What I found most frightening was mom's confusion," unquote. She was
Yeah.
confused and that scared
I don't
you.
remember. Yeah, I don't remember exactly where I wrote that, but um, it was so out of character in terms of everything that I'd ever known about my mother. As I said, she was practical, she was logical, um, she was intelligent, she could figure things out. And I'm not just talking about, not remembering things or whatever. It was literally, it was that time when her cognitive, her initial cognitive impairment was getting to the point where she really couldn't keep up with what was going on at all. So she would keep telling my sister that they were calling her about these bills, and the bills hadn't been taken care of, when they were calling about something entirely different. So it was that confusion, because I also didn't know how to respond to it. And I learned later that even, and my mother eventually was, well, post-mortem, she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, or late in her hospice care. But at that time, it was really mild cognitive impairment, and I just really didn't understand what that meant. But I didn't understand what was going on, and so her confusion confused me, and that made me uncomfortable.
Yeah, I'm sure there were many frightening times during your experience with the caregiving, and that was one of them that you had mentioned. I'm going to paraphrase this next quote because I read it late one night when I was reading before bed, and I wanted to remember it, and I went back several times in the book. Well, I'm going to paraphrase it because I couldn't actually find the actual sentence in the book. I went through a couple of times looking for it, but this one's sort of paraphrased. You said, "The more I tried to make Mom's life easier for her, the harder mine got."
Yes. Well, this is partly this is me. So, I'm a take charge kind of a person. And I took it on, right, as my job to make her life as easy as it could, again, to make her life the best that it could possibly be. And what I could have done was to kind of let her help me do that by asking her, what is it that she needed help with, or what would she like for us to do for her? Now, mind you, as we talked about before, there were times and places and certain decisions that we couldn't leave to her. But once we had sort of made those big decisions, I just stepped in and felt like, well, I'm just going to take control of everything. And I think it would have been easier on both of us. First of all, if I had just let some things go, just kind of not felt like everything had to be dealt with, prioritizing, and also letting her prioritize a little bit. Mom, I can either pay the bills or I can do this. What do you really want help with today? Or something like that.
That's good observations. Very good. We're going to take a break to hear from our national sponsor, so we'll be back in just a moment.
Arden Courts is not just a place to live, it's a place to call home. Residential living combined with quality caregiving. This is the philosophy behind Arden Courts. Communities created exclusively for individuals with Alzheimer's disease and related dementia who would benefit from a safe and structured environment. For additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides, call 888-478-2410 to locate a community nearest you. Inquire about our educational seminars, resource library, or support groups, or simply feel free to ask questions you may have about Alzheimer's and related dementias. At Arden Courts, we know, we understand, and we can help because memory care is all we do. Remember, call 888-478-2410 for additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides. You are listening to your host, Marcia Teele, an Alzheimer's disease and dementia care expert on caregiversolutions.info. If you have a question or wish to share a story, call into the show at 565-1470 and talk with Marcia. Now, back to Caregiver Solutions.
At this time, I'd like to thank our national sponsor, Arden Court's Memory Care Community. Arden Courts is a leader when it comes to memory care, as they have about 55 memory care assisted livings across the United States. Arden Courts is a resource also. If you would like to get more information, they're very happy to share seminars and support group information. And today they're offering a free book. It's the 36-hour day book. Some people call it the Caregiver's Bible because it's so full of information and helpful advice. The book is yours totally free just for the asking because you're tuned into the show. So email the send it to them in an email and just say, hey, I'd like to have the 36-hour day book I heard about on the Caregiver Solution Info Show. The email address is delray@arden-courts.com. Again, email address is delray@arden-courts.com. So shoot an email off, ask for the book, they'll get it in the mail to you, and you'll be really glad that you did. A very good, very, very good book for caregivers. Another great book is this one, and it was written by my guest, Melanie Merriman. She wrote a book, Holding the Net, Caring for My Mother on the Tightrope of Aging. And we're talking about her and her sister caring for their mother as her years went by and she declined, both physically and mentally. So I have a question for you, Melanie. You have done so much work in your life as in hospice work, doing all across the nation, implementing protocol for procedures to bring quality of life to people at the end of life through hospice care. That being said, did your hospice education and knowledge prepare you totally for caring for your aging mother when she ended up needing hospice?
Well, I think it's fair to say that once my mother reached the point where she needed and was enrolled in hospice care, I did feel that I was now more on solid ground because I had been working in the hospice industry for many years at that point. And so I was familiar with hospice care. I had worked with a lot of hospice nurses. And I was knowledgeable about what would happen at the end of life. So in all the ways that I wasn't prepared for that period between her complete independence and her actual last few weeks, once we got to those last few weeks, I did feel more prepared. And I also knew that we now had the support of the hospice experts at that time as well. So I was more comfortable in terms of knowing what was going to happen, but I think I was just as overwhelmed by the emotions because now it wasn't hospice care in theory. It wasn't even hospice care in one of the many presentations I had given around the country for years. It was now hospice care for my mom. And it was just really different. But I can remember, I knew the questions to ask. So I can remember meeting with the administrator at the assisted living where my mother was now actually in the memory unit and tearfully asking her, will you let my mother die here? Because I knew that some places would and some places wouldn't. And they did work with the local hospice, and she was enrolled in the local hospice. But even so, some places, when it really gets to the end, they will move them out. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted her to be able to stay in the room that had become her home and where she felt comfortable. And thankfully, it was the kind of place that would honor that request. So I think I felt clearer about what the questions were. I felt clearer about how to ask for exactly what we needed, how to have the conversations around her medications and those kinds of things. But all of the emotion was still there. And I'd like to just make a comment, Marcia, because I've now been working with several, my friends call me. I mean, as you can imagine, they call me about this kind of stuff, right? And I've been talking to some of my friends, and it's clear to me that even after their loved one is enrolled in hospice, they don't really know what to expect. Some of their expectations are not being met. And so the one thing that I tell people is, once your loved one is enrolled in hospice, don't think that the hospice can automatically imagine what specific needs you have, what questions you have. If there's anything that you're not sure about, anything that you thought was going to happen that didn't happen, anything that you want to happen that isn't happening, call them. They're not mind readers. They don't understand your personal family situation, but they want to, and they want to do what you want them to do. So call, ask questions, and I think you'll be pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, very good advice. So how many years total were you and your sister giving more direct care to your mom before she passed?
You know, I always have trouble with that question because we did sort of move in gradually. You know, we moved into this phase gradually. Um, my mother my mother didn't leave her condo until she was 91. She should have left 2 years earlier. And that's something else that I always tell people is start these conversations early and often. And we didn't, because again, we thought we were prepared for what was going to happen. We just didn't know that what was going to happen was she was going to live for quite a while in a somewhat debilitated state before she died. Um, so I would say it was somewhere around when she was 87 or 88 that actually her best friend, who I was friends with also, let me know that things were changing. I think I went over in 80 when she was 89 and made her wear one of those panic buttons and installed it and all of that sort of thing. So again, she was still there. That was when we started the conversations. We started looking for a place that she might move to. Um, so I would say for about 5 full years, we doing the caregiving. And the couple of years before that, we were sampling it. We were sticking our toe in the water.
So all of those years, 5 to 7 years of starting to be more involved in your mother's care and then being involved pretty much all the time, what lessons did you learn?
Oh my
Did you
gosh.
from life from
A
from
lot.
lessons for life or lessons in death, I guess, either one. Sometimes we learn lessons from the living, sometimes we learn lessons through the dying. Do you have
Hmm.
a lesson or two that you could share with us?
Well, I think first of all, I learned a lot of lessons about um, caring for people as they age. So if I were doing that again, if I were going back in time, and what I tell my friends who are younger than me or anyone who's coming to me and saying, how should we handle this? The one lesson I learned is that you need to acknowledge that this person is going to get older. Aging only goes in one direction. We just don't acknowledge that in this country. We are all going to get older. So I think acknowledging that and accepting that it's going to mean that there will be changes, um, and have those conversations early and often. If you can acknowledge that this is going to happen to everybody, you don't have to wait until it happens to start talking about it and making plans. And I think that's the biggest lesson that I pass on to other people is don't pretend that this isn't going to happen. I had this myth that my mother was going to live this independent life, and then all of a sudden one day she was going to drop dead. And that's a myth. It just doesn't happen that way. So the main thing I tell people is conversations early and often.
I know that it happened to your father that way. He passed suddenly, and it was a surprise. So your mother, she made up for it, and she lived to what, 94 years old. So there's pros and cons, with that, as we've been discussing. Any regrets? Do you have any regrets?
Well, I'll mention two. One from taking care of my mother, and one from taking care of a friend over the last few years. So my biggest regret in taking care of my mother, I've sort of touched on this before, is that I didn't accept how steep her decline was, and uh, and I didn't completely honor her advance directive. So one of the other things that I have learned, it really just reinforced what I already knew from my hospice care, is that if you want to make your preferences known about end of life care, you need to complete an advance directive, and you need to have conversations with your family about what you really want, what your preferences are. And my mother did both of those things. But the third thing you have to do is you really have to tamp down your emotions enough that you can do whatever it is that they wanted you to do, even if you don't agree. And so I think that's one of the mistakes I made. I really did honor my mother's advance directive in every way, except that I did let them insert a pacemaker when she was 93 years old. And I really, looking back, that was a mistake that I made. The mistake I made with my friend is that my friend was dying of cancer. We knew about how long she had to live. It was about 7 months. And the big mistake I made there is that I focused on all of the things that needed to be done. I became a human doing for her. I took care of the appointments. I took care of the bills. I organized the medications. I oversaw the CNAs, the nursing aides. I did and I did and I did. And I made sure she had good food, and I did. And what I didn't do was allow myself to be a human being for her and just be present and just sit with her and hold her hand and say, how, what are you thinking about today? What would you like to talk about? Or what do you want to do? I didn't say, you want to just watch a movie together today? Or you want to go through a whole pint of Ben and Jerry's together? I mean, what do you really want to do today? And so I regret that. And if I had that to do over again, if I do have it to do over again with someone else, I will put down the paperwork and I will find out how I can just be there for that person.
And making those memories even until the end.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's special. So I like to play a little word game with you, sort of like the password game. I'm going to say a word, and I want you to respond with a one-word answer, the first thing that comes to your mind, okay?
Okay.
Okay. First word, struggle. Give me a word.
Overcome.
Denial.
Ooh, not a river in Egypt. Oh, sorry, that was too many words. Denial. Don't.
Joy.
Smiles.
surprise,
delight,
anger,
avoid,
and lastly, hope.
forever.
Thank you for that. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back.
Okay.
Arden Courts is not just a place to live, it's a place to call home. Residential living combined with quality caregiving. This is the philosophy behind Arden Courts. Communities created exclusively for individuals with Alzheimer's disease and related dementia who would benefit from a safe and structured environment. For additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides, call 888-478-2410 to locate a community nearest you. Inquire about our educational seminars, resource library, or support groups, or simply feel free to ask questions you may have about Alzheimer's and related dementias. At Arden Courts, we know, we understand, and we can help because memory care is all we do. Remember, call 888-478-2410 for additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides. You are listening to your host, Marcia Teele, an Alzheimer's disease and dementia care expert on caregiversolutions.info. If you have a question or wish to share a story, call into the show at 888-565-1470 and talk with Marcia. Now, back to Caregiver Solutions.
I'm with Melanie Merriman. She is an author and past family caregiver, and she wrote this book, Holding the Net, Caring for My Mother on the Tightrope of Aging, and a memoir about her taking care of her elderly mother, along with the sister, during the years until her mother passed, in her final years, trying to make the best of a bad situation. I was surprised to learn when I read your book, Melanie, that you had a little bit of it's kind of like a metaphor type of thing going on with a circus. And the walking the tightrope, when we go to the circus, we see tightrope walkers there. And you assign key people in your book roles as if they were taking part in a circus, because if anybody's a caregiver or has been a caregiver, they know that it's like a circus sometimes. It's just crazy, and it's just overwhelming, and it's just crazy, like a circus. So I liked how you did that, but at the end, it seemed like the roles were changed. And the message I got from that was that in caregiving, roles can change and do change, and they sometimes necessarily have to change, and people take on different roles. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Well, I think the biggest surprise, you've mentioned my sister several times, and I think the biggest surprise for all of us was that my sister became my mother's primary caregiver. Growing up, my mother and I were very close, and I think that's because we were very much alike. We were the get up and go, want to be involved in everything kinds of people. And my sister was more introverted. And I think it was hard for my mother to understand that. And she kept wanting to pull my sister out into doing things. And so they had a difficult relationship. My mother and I had a very close relationship. But when the time came, my life situation, I was living in Miami at the time. I was traveling for business a lot. And my sister had recently relocated to New Bern. And the idea of bringing my mother to Miami, well, my mother flat out said she wasn't going to move to Miami. And she said, you're never home. Well, that kind of hurt my feelings because I thought, well, if you come here, I'm going to stay home more. But she lived in Newport Richey, Florida. It was quiet there. North Carolina, New Bern, North Carolina, where my sister lived, was a much more appropriate place for her. And not only that, but my mother had a couple of years before that, we'd been driving around New Bern, all of us, and my mother had seen this building and she said, well, maybe I'll live there someday. And I looked at it, I said, I don't even know what that is. I said, it kind of looks like a nursing home, but why is she talking about going to a nursing home? Again, denial, right? But it turned out to be exactly the right place for her. So it became clear that she was going to move to live near my sister. And I think this just upset the apple cart completely for my sister and myself. I felt like I was going to be cut out of the picture when I was the one who should be doing it. And my sister was not delighted that my mother was going to come and live nearby. But I talked to a friend of mine about it, and she really had an insight into it. She said, because I said, why would my mom choose this? Why would she say she wants to go to North Carolina instead of come and be with me in Miami? And my friend said, maybe your mother looks at this as her last chance to really form a relationship with your sister. Your sister can't say no. So maybe this is her chance to be close to her and form that relationship. And in the end, I will say, and this is why my sister is the hero of the book, or the shero of the book, is that she stepped up to the plate in every possible way. I know for a fact it wasn't easy for her, not just because caregiving isn't easy, but because of the difficult relationship with my mother. But she stepped up to the plate in every way. She was the consummate caregiver. She also took care of me because I was more emotionally devastated. And I think the gift that my mother gave my sister is no regrets. I think if they had not had that time together, my sister might have always, I don't know, felt some regret about her relationship with my mom. And now she has no regrets. She knows she did everything she could for my mom. And so I think my mom just figured that out. I don't know. I told you
Well,
she was smart.
yes, she's very smart, and things happen for a reason, and they happen. My belief is they happen the way they're supposed to. So that turned out to be the same case with your family. This is a wonderful book, Holding the Net. How can someone get their book, Melanie?
Well, it's actually available anywhere books are sold, as we say. So you can buy it on Amazon, you can buy it on Barnes and Noble. I always encourage people, please buy it through your local independent bookstore. They are the most wonderful support for literature in our country. But you can buy it anywhere. It's also available in ebooks, Kindle, Nook, and I think maybe others. I just don't know about the others. So you can really find it anywhere. If you go to my website, which is just melaniemerriman.com, and click on Holding the Net and then buy the book, it'll just give you a link directly to Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Books A Million, and a link to indie.com, which is where you can find your local independent bookstore.
Great. I actually went to the website holdingthenet.com and I got to it. So any way you can get the book. It's great. So thank you for being with us today, Melanie. I appreciate it. Thanks for sharing your story. And I encourage everyone to get the book and read it. It's a great love story, a memoir of aging and taking care of your parents. So thank you, Melanie. Take care. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you next week on caregiversolutions.info every Tuesday, 6 p.m. or on the iHeartRadio app under WNN. Take care, everybody. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.
Thanks for joining us for this week's Caregiver Solutions with Marcia Teele. Join us next week as Marcia, who has 15 years of Alzheimer's disease and dementia care experience, brings you more needed information to help with the care of your loved one. This show can be seen again on caregiversolutions.info, and questions can be left on the site, which may be used on the program to help others. See you next week for more Caregiver Solutions. The